wonderful to be here. I can feel the energy in the room, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this topic of unidentified submerged objects, or USOs. And first, I just want to say, Gary, that was very impressive. You're a tough act to follow. Please don't take my PhD away after this presentation. But so here goes. Well, ultimately, yeah, and so as Diana mentioned, my background is in oceanography, and I have a PhD. I've done years of oceanographic research and applied operations, and I have the connections and network, having led America's top ocean agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So it's sort of natural for me to explore this angle of the phenomena. And so I'm going to present to you today what I have found over the last few years, and the impossible, potentially or not, aspects of it. And so first off, interesting, comparing it to UAP, which Gary addressed so in the skies and space, which Gary addressed so superbly. There's not a lot known about the topic, and this is the published literature to date. There's a few others, but there's not much. I mean, the number of UFO books out there could fill this auditorium. So it's interesting about that. I list a few of them. The first I know of was Jim and Coral Lorenzen's book. They have a chapter dedicated on USOs in their piece, and then these other works that have been published. Sanderson's was the first. Carl Feint had really an extensive compilation of reports, all eyewitness reports, and then an interesting one by Stonehill and Mantle about Russia's observations of the phenomena in the oceans and lakes, and then a really interesting piece by Preston Dennett. This undersea UFO base where he explores all the sightings in Southern California. I found that really fascinating because I grew up in the region and had not met anybody who made reports like that, but there are many. And he does a great job documenting them. I'll go into something else he speculates about later in the presentation. And then Debbie Zegelmeyer is a scuba diver like my wife and I, and she treats the aspect as well in a fairly recent piece. But that's pretty much it. Fortunately, though, as Gary mentioned, I was able to provide a little bit of scholarly research on the topic, integrating my what I came to learn from those texts and other observations I've made, and I put this in Sol's first white paper, with the conclusions basically that we don't know much about the ocean. But we do know that UAP exists in the ocean, and as well as transmedium travel of the phenomena, and there are observations, and the fact that we've not observed more than 10% of the ocean volume or 25% of the seafloor indicates fairly strongly there's probably a lot more of the phenomena going on that we just don't know about. And I make conclusions about national security as well as general ocean research in this if you're interested in checking it out. But recently now, Richard Dolan, a fairly well-known UAP researcher, has addressed the topic in, I think, a very disciplined way, and has the first of a 3-volume set out now. Here's the cover, and the initial volume only covers from the 18th century to about the beginning, the first half of the 20th century, but very interesting. And I like what he's done in that he's taken eyewitness accounts and reports, and he's basically put a grade on how potentially reliable they are. So I think that's a pretty good approach to do this, because we want to be serious and scientific about our study and treatment of the topic. So, for example, I'll start with the 20th century reports in the book, and one of them is in the Gulf of Thailand by a Dutch skipper of a steamship. And I picked the few that are clearly USO. He's got a lot of UAP near the water reports, and I'm not going to go into those. But this was a really interesting piece because multiple witnesses, like Gary addressed, as being an important part of evidence. And this was a captain and some of the officers of the ship seeing a large lighted object ahead of the ship, and then observed under the ship, and then moving forward again and emerging out of the water. And this is the second such instance this captain saw in that region, and it was reported in the Singapore Times. Other interesting observations include a Navy ship right after World War II off Alaska, And this occurred, again, multiple witnesses, sailors on the deck, seeing an object come out of the water, and then it was during sunset, so big disc it was, and it was over 200 feet in width and diameter, and all these sailors later reported it, and I have served on ships with many sailors, and I think they're all credible observers. So, and that wasn't the only Navy ship. There's others, and I'll go into that. I point out, too, these are some really terrific images. So the artist that Richard hired, I drew from these and got his permission. I think add a kind of spice to this, his work. But then there's an interesting other report that I found interesting to me because it was by a naval officer on a ship in the Arabian Gulf, and where I've served there for 2 years straight at one time, and then another 2 deployments separately for 9 months. So I've been in this body of water quite a bit. And this report was of these spiraling light sort of sheets on the surface, or right below the surface, in an appearance like you see depicted here. And it was also the first report in the Lorenzen book, the first chapter, the first full chapter on USOs. And that was interesting to me because I was able to basically be a debunker on this because I've seen the phenomena firsthand. And what really is happening is that I was on this is for me, it was 1995 on the USS Peleliu, and we were going through the Straits of Malacca, which is a kind of hairy navigation operation because you have Omani patrol ships and Iranian patrol ships querying you on the radio, and it's a kind of a national security nightmare when you're doing that. But we were driving our ship at night, and I saw a feature just like this one. In this instance, the Navy captain saw one about 200 feet in diameter, and these light spirals are swirling around. And in our case, we didn't see just one, we saw several. They were pretty large ones, kind of over next to each other on either side of the ship. And I remember I was actually off watch, and the captain called me up, and he says, "Get to the bridge right now." And so I got to the bridge, and everybody's looking at these things, and he said to me, "What the hell are those?" And I knew I'd heard of this before. What it is, it's bioluminescent plankton, and they were getting excited because in the Straits of Malacca, the currents go against each other, and it generates these vortices on the surface. And so the spinning vortices excite the plankton in a way that is that aligns with the motion of the water. So it's a really beautiful thing to behold. But I found it interesting because Richard put it in the book and another report too, and I know firsthand it's not an NHI. Well, actually, it is NHI, but it's a much microscopic NHI, not the kind we think about. So there you go. But that was an interesting thing. And then I like this report because this is from Diana's father, and he was a sonar man. I like this. It says sonar man right there. That was his rating in the Coast Guard on the Bittersweet. And Diana, where was this again?
Okay, so it was on he was in the Coast Guard, and that's the Bittersweet, and this is in the 1950s, I think like 56 or 57.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I think it was either near Alaska, but he said it was in the Bermuda Triangle, and I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what he said. And he was a man who never talked about weird things like this. He was a man of few words, actually. So yeah, so he witnessed something that was very similar to the things that you described the mariners see.
Right. Then thank you, Diana. And for those who couldn't hear, so this was actually, pardon me, I made a mistake. It was in the 50s in the Bermuda Triangle, and he found an object on sonar they couldn't explain. And this isn't the first time. I have other reports of this. And he was someone who, Diana said, didn't talk about weird things, but he talked about this. So, and he's not the only one, and I'll go into that. But I appreciate your father's service.
Thank you. It was as big as a football field, and it stopped the electricity on the ship, and it kept them there for hours.
And so Diana just said it stopped the ship, they lost power, and it was as large as a football field. And again, this is not the only one that's been observed. I'll get to that. Interesting. So thank you, Diana. But great. And so, for example, now another report in Richard's book is of this ship, a ship that type I served on later the USS Maury was a hydrographic survey ship right after the war. It found itself in the Pacific, transiting from the Japanese area of operations. And being a hydrographic ship, I've served on several, they're using multi-beam sonar. In this case, it was a single beam. But they're measuring the bottom of the seafloor and converting that into depth and updating the nautical charts. I've done this quite a bit. And they came to a feature like your father, and all of a sudden the depth got lower for a long distance, several hundred yards. And then it went back to normal depth. They came back to try to find it again, and it wasn't there. And some people might say, oh, they're scattering off things like fish schools and plankton layers, but they don't create the backscatter that is as strong as a seafloor, and that's the kind of backscatter the ship observed. So that was notable, and again, not the only time it's occurred. This report, also in Richard's book, was really interesting to me. This is multiple witnesses on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, the Franklin D. Roosevelt, in 1954. We don't know the exact operating area. They made the report, but it was in a whole a transit going from the East Coast to the West Coast through over around Cape Horn. But ultimately, they reported a large object, hundreds of feet wide, a disc. It was a cigar shape, pardon me, like you see here. And before it exited the scene, rapidly going vertical, 2 discs came out of the water and entered the craft, and then it took off. And a lot of sailors reported this, so you have that. And then this is one of the more interesting ones, and this is a book by an author named Chris Stiles. And he did some extensive research and interviewed some Canadian divers after this NATO mine clearing exercise. That was the name of the exercise, Sweep Clear 5. And ultimately, several divers stated during an interview that they not only dived down after a report of UAP in the air entering the water, they went and dived in the wreck site where they supposed it to be and saw 2 discs in addition to occupants of the craft leaving the vehicles, the discs, and conducting repair work underwater. And there's even supposedly film of this, video recorded, and I don't know where that is, and I have a number of friends who are colleagues who are working to find that film, but all eyewitnesses who've stated in interviews that this occurred. So that's pretty remarkable. Now, this is another one, not quite a USO, but just coming to light now in recent reporting by an Australian researcher named Jeff Cruikshank, as well as Pippa Malmgren, who had a senior position in the Bush administration and whose father served under multiple presidents. And you might have seen this reported already. But this was a nuclear test, detonation in the atmosphere about 48 kilometers. This was the name of the test, Blue Gill Triple Prime. I have no idea where they get these names from, but in the 60s here. And they did 2 of these. You can see the 2 aircraft you see were the observation planes that were filming the bursts during these tests. There were multiple tests, and this little picture here is an image of the burst that occurred from one of the aircraft at altitude. And this little section, that triangle that's carved out, is reportedly from a UAP that fell out of the sky because of the EMP created by the nuclear burst. And not only has Pippa's father has assessed this, reported this to be actually true, President Kennedy knew about it, and then it fell into the ocean. And some corroborating evidence for this was from the USS Safeguard, a salvage ship, the exact class of ship my wife served on. That's how up to date her ship was, unfortunately. And so, yeah, I mean, believe me, and my ship too, it served in Vietnam. So you know when you serve on a ship that old, it shows it. But there is deck log reporting here of a pod being recovered. And at the moment it was recovered, a pod. So what is that? The ship lost power, which is interesting, like your dad's ship. So there's that, and that's pretty fascinating. Then as I've been coming out and speaking, some people might have heard this story already. I mentioned it very briefly during my congressional testimony, but people have called me, and they've told me, hey, I've never reported this because you come out I feel like I feel that I can actually do this now and maybe not lose my job or my reputation. And a nuclear submarine officer who served on this ship, a ballistic missile submarine, interestingly, a lot of these ships that are encountering the objects, nuclear powered, like aircraft carriers, like this submarine, he said that he was in this time in the North Atlantic. And this is a great story because they were operating, this was during the Cold War, so the Russian submarines were their adversary. They're on the lookout for them, being counter-detected by them. They have procedures when that happens. But during the time, the sea state was so rough that they were at depth and they were still taking 40-degree rolls. And that happens on a submarine when you have real high sea state, 40 feet or so. And when that's the case, though, the noise generated by waves is so high that you really can't be detected by another sub, and your sonar won't work really well either. That ambient noise kind of masks the signals you want to hear. But at the time then, they had a contact on sonar, which just surprised they'd even be able to have one, so it must have been quite loud. This was active. And then it stopped, and then it started to rapidly close on them. Now, it was closing so fast that their only conclusion was that it had to have been a Russian torpedo, because they trained for this. This is what they do. And so something closing that fast at that depth, that was just the only threat they could imagine it to be. And they have procedures, and one of the procedures was, of course, to turn away from it, and the second was to go dive deep. And the thing kept closing. And it was an old sub, by the way, and they actually dove to very close to within the crushed depth of the submarine. This doesn't happen, okay? You have to fear for your life to even do that, especially in an old boat. But they did. They were convinced. The object then stalled and went around to their stern and trailed them for a few minutes. And they really didn't, and actually I didn't even say this, they announced general quarters, everybody took their battle stations. It was one of those things. And something I've done before in the Arabian Gulf. And so it followed them for a few minutes, and then it just rapidly exited the area. And this lived with this officer for years. He just could never explain it. And when he heard me testify, he just had to get it off his chest. And I have other friends who serve on submarines who say they've seen fast-moving objects they could not explain either. Yes. So, and one is here. So, in fact, another person who called me after the testimony, and these are people I've vetted pretty well. They were in the Navy. I was in the Navy. We talked about our service together. They're very legitimate. This was a captain who flew in the P-3 aircraft you see depicted up there. And so a Navy captain, he in the P-3s, now the modern versions, the P-8, these are anti-submarine surveillance aircraft. And what they do is they drop sonar buoys that send acoustic signals to look for subs, and those signals are transmitted by a wire and antenna up to the sub, and they coordinate with ships to go hunt subs. And in the Pacific right now, to basically counter China and their growing navy, these planes also operate with what they call a low-frequency active ship. That's an image of the ship right there in the middle, and we have several of these surveillance ships. And the way they operate, this is like spy satellites for the ocean. They take a low-frequency active, very powerful sound source, and they send out pings looking for submarines. And if a sub is anywhere within 100 miles, you're going to get a ping because these are really loud sound sources. And then the way what they'll do, the MO is to then go to the passive sonar and get the signatures of the sub. So the propellers, the engine noise, even the flow around the bow, all of those, depending on how loud they are, their target strength, as well as their frequency range, are the signature for any given class of sub. So that's how our people can basically look at that and go, that's a Russian Victor, or that's a Chinese or a North Korean that. And they're very good at this. This is how we won the Cold War. And so this particular officer told me that he had three different encounters. One, when he was flying P-3s off Iceland, not near any commercial air routes, low level, so a couple hundred feet off the deck, and he was operating with a frigate. And they all of a sudden start getting trailed by a UAP. It's on radar. The frigate's got it. They can't really tell what it is. It's not really operating like anything we know. And we knew we didn't have any NATO assets in the area. And if it was a Russian asset, it would have done things differently. And it trailed them for tens of minutes and then left. And so that surprised him. It kind of got his mind thinking, what was that? Again, you wouldn't have a Cessna out off Iceland doing this. It was something, and it wouldn't have been, if it was the Russians, we would have known, and they would have operated at different altitude and flight characteristics. So he had that experience, but then what he really wanted to share with me was this, that they were doing one of these low-frequency active drills looking for Chinese submarines, as they do, off Japan, and 2 separate occasions, a month apart, they had a high target strength hit on active. And when they went to passive, they heard nothing. And that, again, that's why I say this is like the spy satellites of the ocean. These things are so good. If it was anything we made, there would be a passive signature and they would have heard it. So what was it? I mean, that was a USO. That's by definition. Wish we could find more about that, but there are other cases that might give us clues. So who here has read Lou Elizondo's book, Imminent? Wow, wow, look at that. Okay, very good. Same here and here. And so then you all probably know this case where he talked about a object the size of an oil rig moving over 300 knots under the ocean on FMV, full motion video of a classified overhead system. And I know this instant be true from other sources that are still in the intelligence community. And so that's significant. I want to see that data, by the way, but those are sources I trust. So that's out there. And then you might also heard Lou's story about this rescue swimmer. Lou, he said that they were recovering a missile, a spent missile casing. I think it was really a torpedo, because I know that's what we normally do when we send a rescue swimmer. We have spent torpedo rounds and we retrieve them. I haven't not had a chance to verify with Lou, but that's a picture of how it's done with a torpedo. And normally what you do is when it's on the surface, you send a rescue swimmer down to hook up the wire to the torpedo, and then they bring it up and you can reuse it. And so in this instance, in the Caribbean, Lou shares how the pilot and rescue swimmer reported to him how, as they were doing one of these operations, a very large dark mass started rising from below, and it scared them and terrified them so much they just discontinued the operation and they hauled the swimmer back up. And this is the entire flight crew telling Lou what happened here. I've not interviewed the flight crew, but again, Lou is someone I trust, and we're going to see how much more of that we are going to hear about. But then there is, of course, the Tic Tac case with the Nimitz and Dave Fravor and Alex Dietrich and those. And the interesting thing about that case is we all know and have heard that the UAP Tic Tac was initially observed right over the water surface, which was roiling beneath it. And we don't know, but that potentially was it a drone coming from a mothership under the water? That seems to be a characteristic in many other cases, so a distinct possibility. And a nuclear ship again, interesting. Well, and then there was the Agua Dia UAP by Customs and Border Patrol that I wrote about in the Soul paper. The SCU has done a great job. Robert Powell, we met with him yesterday and we discussed this report they issued to basically scientifically validate the occurrence of this object going transmedium multiple times at speeds of something on the order of 90 miles per hour, which is something the U.S. Navy, the technology we would very much like to have, because nothing we know of, and Kevin can absolutely talk to this, can do that. We have not engineered something to obey the laws of physics and conduct that kind of transmedium travel. Now, this is another famous one. The USS Omaha, Jeremy Corbell is one of the journalists who's reported on this, leaked the video from this ship off Southern California. And for those who've not seen it, this was a UAP that was hovering for a while over the waterline, which is that little boundary you see there. It's a blow up of an infrared sensor called Sapphire, and it went transmedium into the water. Again, we don't have aircraft that do this. What's interesting about that report is it was validated for me after my hearing when another person called me, another sailor, and he was a chief petty officer, and he was on the bridge of the Omaha when this happened. And a great guy. I actually enjoy these calls immensely because I loved my service in the Navy, and these are all really great patriots that had wanted to serve their country too, and it was really easy to vet these people because we have so many common experiences. And the interesting thing about him is then he went on to a sister ship called the Jackson, depicted on the lower left, right there, and deployed to Hawaii. And through SoCal, again, they were seeing so many UAPs that they were fairly certain did not correlate with any known aviation tracks, that they were becoming desensitized to it. Yeah, really, it was just another thing for them. So remarkable. Now, I talked about Preston Dennett's book, Undersea Alien Base. This is something, again, so I'm reporting on what I think are valid, but there's also some things out there that I think are junk. And this is one of them. So this whole report about off Southern California, so that's Point Dume, just north. And this is something Preston, not to disparage him, but he goes at and speculates in his book quite extensively about this potentially being a base because it looks so unusual. And that's really a feature of Google Earth and the way Google Earth renders, and it usually uses different data sets. And I know this, and I'll explain why in a second, that it's not a base, it's natural. Before I do, though, I think there's a very interesting thing here. So as this was all being kind of circulating on the social media, this happened. Google Earth removed the feature. Like, why did they do that? This is interesting. Now, I've spoken at the Soul Foundation Second Symposium about the disinformation campaign that Arrow is executing right now, and I won't go into length. You can read my testimony, but this occurred all around that same time. I don't know why. I have no idea who did it, but I thought that was really interesting. And it was just basically baseless because here's the real data from the U.S. Geological Survey and the scientists who study this feature. It's called Sycamore Knoll. You can look here. It is unusual. Interestingly, the paper that was published on it even used the word anomalous. It is not. It stands out. But the geology, in terms of its formation, is explainable. And what they did is they conducted surveys with sub-bottom profilers, and they looked at the internal structure of it. There's no warehouse of UAP going on there, and it's very explainable. So I guess my point here is there is a lot of unusual phenomena in the oceans, but we got to stick to the science, the real evidence, and this is a peer-reviewed report on this particular feature. I will say though that it's not. I wouldn't rule out that there might be these features somewhere in the oceans because again we have not explored much of the ocean, relatively speaking. So kind of bringing this all home, I wanted to share something interesting with you. So first of all. This is what my wife looked like when she was working in the Navy. No joke. She surface supplied, hard hat diver. I'm very proud of her service. And so this film, The Abyss, which came out when I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1989, its whole plot involves NHI in the oceans, and they're coming from an undersea base. The interesting thing about it too, so this is like not the first time people have talked about it or thought about it. It seems Hollywood is always on the leading edge here, but they use the term NTI, non-terrestrial intelligence. That was the term. So it's funny how it's all coming back here. But again, not the first. H.G. Wells in 1897 had a short story called In the Abyss, where this exact thing happens, where a scientist goes down in a bath escape. He's depicted there, a little diving bell really, and he encounters NHIs on the seafloor, residing in there. So, and then even 30 years before him, Jules Verne, of course, pardon me, well, I won't, it's not, I'm missing it, but Jules Verne talked about it in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, where he mentioned that there could be all sorts of life we've never discovered under the sea. And I know this to be true because at NOAA, we were finding new species every day, every year. And in fact, and not just small little microbes or insignificant corals. These were like new species of killer whales and all sorts of pelagic fish. Very interesting. So the fact that there could be many things we don't know about, NHIs or whatnot in the ocean, is a very distinct possibility. And that's why I've called for much more active research on this topic. And as Gary talked about, I'm trying to be a leading voice in the ocean science community to take this topic seriously, because we have a large array of assets. We have many federal ships, we have university ships, we have satellite constellations that are looking at our oceans all the time. We have buoys, we have fleets of drones that NOAA and universities operate. They're all exploring the ocean. And my pitch has been this, that if we're going to be looking to learn more about our ocean, let's just add UAP as another research parameter to explore. And in that way, maybe we will learn more about this phenomena, because of so much of the ocean not being explored yet, we are very likely to learn so much more. It's very likely there might be many more USOs than UFOs in our planet, but we're also going to learn a lot more of them if we study the ocean.